BeerCon4.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about practical vulnerability intelligence, something that is I've learned a lot about recently, and want to present some more information about how to do it. So a little bit about me. My name's Will, Bizgido Token on Twitter. I currently work for the Equinix Threat Analysis Center. I used to work for Cyjax. I went to the University of Plymouth. I also help run the Curated Intelligence Trust Group, and I also do OSINT for the National Child Protection Task Force. So yeah, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about practical vulnerability intelligence, why is it important, how you can do it, and what happens if you don't do it. So, just a slide about some of the acronyms and things we're going to be covering today, like LPE, CVE, SQLI, RCE. Going to be, saying a lot of acronyms, so I thought I'd, try and introduce you to them. So, if we go back into the history of vulnerabilities and the CVE database, so in 1999, it was when the first CVE list was ever created, so about over 20 years ago. And then in 2002, NIST actually, recommended using the CVE list. And then US agencies were actually required to use applications and products that used CVEs to track vulnerabilities. And then NIST actually launched the National Vulnerability Database, the NVD, to try and track new vulnerabilities. And then 2016, the CVE program expanded, and a whole load of organizations were actually invited to come be CVE numbering authorities. So companies like Oracle and Cisco can actually name their own CVEs. And then in 2021, CISA actually launches the catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities, which is one of the more recent events and is very pertinent to this talk today. So part of practical vulnerability intelligence is knowing who your stakeholders are. What's the point of gathering all this intelligence if you're not going to give it to anyone? So part of what we do, part of what I do as a CTI analyst, is I identify vulnerabilities and identify ones that are exploited in the wild, and then I actually give it over to threat and vulnerability management team. So what does the threat and vulnerability management team do? They do asset inventory. They have a configuration management database. They use internal and external vulnerability scanners, so sort of network-based scanning and agent-based scanning. And then they also apply automated security updates and patches. They apply mitigation and workarounds. If you're unable to patch, you have to try and assess the feasibility of actually being able to patch a critical vulnerability. And they do all sorts of other asset management type duties. And they actually are often not the ones actually doing the patches. They are the ones informing the IT admins to apply a patch. So what does cyber threat intelligence do? So part of the cyber threat intelligence role is to support the TVM team. We're going to be identifying new vulnerabilities and exploits. We're going to be using all sorts of we're going to use all source intelligence, not just OSINT, but also what can you gather from sort of trust groups and working groups as well. And then we're going to basically analyze a new vulnerability, assess the impact of it, contextualize why this one is important, and then we're going to share that vulnerability advisory report back to the TVM team to make sure we actually patch the critical vulnerabilities. Another part of the CTI's function is to monitor the cybercriminal underground. So we're going to be infiltrating forums and trying to figure out, and groups and try and figure out what the latest vulnerabilities that are being exploited by the threat actors in the wild. And we're also going to be, tracking the threat landscape trends as well. So what are some of these trends? So a CTI company called Flashpoint earlier this year they said that 11,860 vulnerabilities were disclosed in the first half of 2022, and about 27% of them were missed by MITRE. So these are vulnerabilities that aren't listed in a database that are being exploited. So in 2021, the Google Project Zero said they found 58 in the wild 0 days, and that's not just in Google products. Project Zero researched other products to be able to secure Google after Operation Aurora. So that that's the highest number of 0 days exploited in the wild since they even started beginning to track them. And Avanti also said that 65 they did an analysis of 65 new vulnerabilities, and over 1/3 of them were being actively exploited and traded around on the dark web. So zero-day exploits. Everyone has a little bit of a phobia of those. Everyone's there's nothing more fun when a 0 day is dropped on a Friday, but these are kind of the most important types of vulnerabilities that as a CTI analyst and as a TVM team you want to be able to track these and make sure that whether you're going to be affected by them. So basically what a 0 day includes is they are unknown to the vendor. The vendor doesn't know about them, but there's a vulnerability in that software, and often they are exploited in the wild before the vendor has been able to patch it. They are highly valuable. They can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars depending on who you're selling them to. They're traded on the underground markets, and they can also be commercially developed by the exploit industry, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. Another type of some of the more interesting types of 0 days that I've come across is sort of 0 day vulnerabilities that are in sort of the software supply chain. So open source software, even though everyone thinks, oh, it's open source and it's it's audited and multiple people can review it. I mean, that kind of thing sort of slips through the gaps when you start to think about like what happened with Log4j. So the software supply chain. So some of the examples I've used here, we've got Chromium. If a vulnerability is found in Chromium, all the browsers that use Chromium are sort of affected by it, but they're not necessarily patched to that vulnerability as well. So they have, like, each of the browsers have to manually, go in and investigate how their browser is affected and then apply the patch. So if you can figure out the vulnerability in Chromium, then you can, you have a gap between when the patches are applied to the downstream browsers. And same with the Linux kernel. Linux kernel's used by all sorts of different devices. We've got IoT devices and mobile Android devices. So when vulnerabilities like PwnKit and Dirty Pipe and Dirty Gred come along, it takes a while for the downstream distros to actually apply those patches. So that's definitely a type of 0 day you want to keep an eye on and prioritize. So because of the broad impact. And some of the worst types of 0 days, RCE, remote code execution, unauthenticated. So any system on the internet, as long as you can reach it, you can execute code on it. And the same as being able to upload a file on it. A lot of the time, you can upload a shell or something to a product. And the information disclosure, so credential leak is sort of pass traversal, being able to just visit a file on a directory and just steal the creds that way. That's happened to quite a few products. And then we've got a one-liner that can fit into a tweet. So another shout out to Log4j. Speaking of Log4j, this is kind of the sort of pinnacle of 0 days. This thing is going to be around for the next 5, 10, 15 years. The Department of Homeland Security reckons, and it kind of started in Minecraft. So it kind of started with basically some teenagers figuring out that you can just type in a message on you could type this string and a message on the server, and then you can get it to do all sorts of interesting, funky stuff. So it kind of relied on the Java naming and directory interface, and it exploited the lightweight directory access protocol. And as soon as they sort of figured out how to do it in Minecraft, then you suddenly had all these threat actors doing it as well. It's like that much of a ubiquitous vulnerability. So we had botnets exploiting it, DDoS botnets, cryptocurrency mining botnets, ransomware groups like Conti, and then APT, nation-state APT groups as well. So another slide, sort of explaining 0 day exploitation in the wild. Some examples. It's not always. Trying to sort of home the point that it's not always nation-state APT groups that are actually leveraging 0 days. It's actually cybercrime groups as well, especially ransomware groups. Because ransomware groups, they're basically generating millions of dollars, stealing them from organizations. They actually have, the skills and the abilities and the resources to be able to invest research and development and develop their own 0 days these days. So we had groups like Fin11, REvil, Five Hands, Exotic Lily, and the Emotet botnet. They all have been able to, develop 0 days and use them to basically in financially motivated campaigns. And of course, who can forget, Eternal Blue by the Shadow Broker, that was leaked by the Shadow Brokers, and that was developed by the NSA. So another sort of source of vulnerabilities is Metasploit. One of the interesting things about Metasploit is it has a collection of over 2,300 exploits. So if you think what products do you have on the sort of perimeter of your organization? Are any of them vulnerable to one of these thousands of exploits that can just be basically launched against your products as a sort of Hail Mary attack? And one of the interesting things about Metasploit is you constantly have researchers trying to do a pull request and try and merge their exploits into Metasploit, and sometimes you actually get 0 days leaked this way by researchers figuring out how to reverse engineer and bypass a patch, and and they try to put it into Metasploit before anything else, which is handy, especially for threat actors. The exploit industry, this is kind of a more shadowy area, but oftentimes when you see Apple put out a new security update and they say this vulnerability was exploited in the wild, quite a lot of the time it's going to be developed by one of these nice companies. NSO Group, Cytrox, Exodus Intelligence, Gamma Group. They're sort of private industries. A lot of these private companies have like ex analysts and researchers that used to work for the state intelligence agencies as well, sort of using their skills like mercenaries, really. This was quite interesting. I was actually approached on LinkedIn by one of these interesting companies, and I immediately saw a few red flags when they say, we have government clients globally, we exploit Apple iOS, and we use all sorts of security research engineer. So I sort of want to try and warn people, the types of companies that are doing this are doing it for surveillance, for hacking dissidents, for hacking journalists, and anyone who criticizes the government, basically. Another source of vulnerability intelligence is failed bug reports. So sometimes companies have vulnerability disclosure programs, something like BugCrowd or HackerOne or something, or even Microsoft's private vulnerability disclosure program. Sometimes the researcher sort of gets frustrated, and they may feel like that their bug is not being properly, they're not being properly compensated for the amount of work that they've done to find that vulnerability by a bug bounty. So sometimes they just leak it. And that's not always ideal, but as a CTI analyst we need to be able to monitor when this happens. And sometimes there's some researchers that happens more often than not, so definitely want to keep an eye on some of them. Hacking competitions. So Pwn to Own was created it began in 2007, and they would actually reward vulnerability researchers whenever they found a new 0-day. And there was a few controversies about when it first began, but everyone realized, this is for the greater good. And so one of the teams that was always winning Pwn to Own, always getting the top prizes, were the Chinese team. And they actually, basically, the Chinese government realized that, our best researchers are going to America and helping American companies, and or companies that aren't in China. So the Chinese government basically, put a stop to that, and they created the Tianfu Cup. And ever since then, the Chinese government, has been basically keeping the vulnerability research for themselves, and eventually it may get to the vendor, but it has to go through the Chinese National Vulnerability Database first, the CNVD, and who has access to that. So product security testing, sort of another interesting source of intelligence is when you get organizations that are vulnerability researchers, and they work to basically stop, identify and help fix vulnerabilities in products. And sometimes they often can disclose new types of exploitation techniques or new vulnerabilities in products, and it's also it's good that they are doing this, and it's good that they be able to keep products secure. However, sometimes the vendors whose products are being exploited don't patch in time, and there's some of them have like a 90-day or 100-day disclosure timeline, and if you're not patched by then, well, then the exploit's public, or the vulnerability's public at least. So new proof of concept exploitation in the wild. InfoSec Twitter, a lot of these guys are right on it as soon as they detect new CVEs being exploited in the wild. We want to be able to keep track of whether a new CVE is exploited or not. And if you follow some of these guys, they will, Herman Fernandez or Bad Packets or Shadow Server or Grey Noise, they are definitely a great source of information to actually help you realize if something's being exploited or not. Another source of information is the cybercriminal underground. So this was sort of a prolific threat actor on an underground forum called Exploit.in, which is sort of a private, closed access Russian-speaking underground forum. You have to pay to be able to access this forum, and then inside this forum, you see people offering, 0 days and access to organizations and things. And as a CTI analyst, we need to be able to sort of monitor these communities and figure out like who's going after it. So the ecosystem, the cybercriminal ecosystem is sort of threat actors looking to buy 0 days, and threat actors looking to uncover 0 days, and access brokers using end days and selling access to lists of products that are vulnerable to 0 days as well, and end days as well. So another thing, in the Conti leaks in June 2021, someone actually joined the Conti leaks chat, and someone actually received information that they have a 0 day to privately sell to the group, and this was a 0 day LP in one of the Microsoft Windows drivers. I actually sent this to Microsoft, and they said that even though all the versions are listed there, they actually said that not all of them were patched. So, so that was quite good to let them know that 0 day is still going around. Another thing, one of the more important parts of vulnerability intelligence is trying to figure out who's actually exploiting what and why. So advanced persistent threat groups are kind of some of the things that keep CISOs awake at night, but you can definitely break down the characteristics based on who's actually doing what. So I said here, North Korea tries to steal 0 days from researchers. China actually recruits exploit developers from Tianfu Cup, which I covered earlier. Russia has been known to hire private industry experts like Positive Technologies, which has been sanctioned by the Treasury. Iran will actually opportunistically exploit critical CVEs. So basically, whenever a new vulnerability comes out, they're obviously some of the first to actually go after it and opportunistically take advantage before people have actually had time to patch. India and South Korea, last year it was revealed that they hired a US firm, Exodus Intelligence, and purchased 0 days off of them. Western intelligence partners actually often also partner with commercial 0 day brokers, so Zerodium. And then you have Saudi Arabia and the UAE, how I hire Israeli spyware companies like NSO Group. And then as well as the sort of African countries, Egypt, Nigeria, Sudan, also do the same sort of thing from the Italian 0 day broker hacking team. So this is an example of North Korea trying to steal 0 days. They created multiple social media accounts, and then they would message you on Twitter and ask you if you want to collaborate on 0 day research, and they'd actually send you a backdoor and try and steal it off your computer. China, some of the examples of vulnerabilities exploited by China. All of these, if you can notice anything about some of these, they're all initial access vulnerabilities. So as soon as, like I was saying with the Tianfu Cup and the private vulnerability industry, the Chinese actually are working with the intelligence services to be able to establish a foothold inside a target organization. So they will basically scan your perimeter, figure out what you have, and then they will develop a 0 day to break in. Russia, although they do the same kind of thing as China and Iran, opportunistically exploiting things, the Russian government and the intelligence services are more likely to, they're sort of the only ones currently developing exploits for industrial control systems. So you have the Sandworm team, the Russian Intelligence Directorate, the GRU, actually develop sort of exploits, denial of service vulnerabilities for ICS equipment in the Siemens Cyprotech to basically take down a Ukrainian electrical power station in 2016. And then in 2017 you had the Xenotime Group, which is the Russian Federation Research Institute, actually developed an exploit in the Schneider Electric Tricon X Tricon to be able to disable the sensor to actually take down a petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia. And then more recently, in 2022, Dragos and Mandiant actually managed to identify a malware called InController or what was it, Pipe Dream, and it's actually had a vulnerability in it in ASRock motherboards to be able to disable human-machine interfaces. And it was apparently used against the US gas pipeline, but it's kind of still a bit of a mystery on that one. The advanced persistent threats in Iran, the advanced persistent threat groups in Iran are, they, as I said earlier, they opportunistically exploit vulnerabilities. They, the IRGC was exploiting Fortinet VPNs to be able to gain initial access inside the healthcare networks, and they'd use that to, deploy ransomware against hospitals and things like that. Again, they went after Log4j, and again, they, use it to establish initial access and move around laterally. And in September 22, the Five Eyes intelligence community actually sort of disclosed and presented their sort of tactics, techniques, and procedures. And it was very interesting to see, the US, Canada, UK, Australia all come together and say, confirm we saw around doing this. So, key tools and resources. I've covered a few of them already. We have, Twitter, the CISA, Kev, Catalog, Shodan, attacker knowledge base, and this is quite a good one, the CVE Trends website. You can actually use all of these to be basically track vulnerabilities exploited in the wild. So 4 key lessons. Vulnerability intelligence requires a broad knowledge of products and the tech stack to be able to do effectively. I recommend to prioritize attack surface monitoring because the attackers are scanning you, trying to profile your organization, try and figure out what products you're using, to then, as soon as when a new exploit comes out, they can immediately get in. If you're basically in a race against time against them, and it requires vigilance and monitoring of multiple types of sources. As I said earlier, you want to be able to monitor trust groups. You want to be able to monitor open source news websites of attacks, whether they got in by this way or the other. You basically want to figure out which products are being exploited currently and if you're affected by them or not. And I also recommend creating a runbook to deal with a new critical vulnerability. It's very important to practice these as well, because at some point maybe a product you use across your entire edge, suddenly a new vulnerability comes out tonight. So what's your plan to deal with it? And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and left a little bit of time for a question or two. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed.